We're joined by an impressive panel of regional and international leaders. Please welcome Camilla Kuckartz, Regional Program Manager for Basic Education and Skills Program Africa at the European Commission. Welcome, Camilla. Virpi Stucki, Chief of the Division of Fair Production, Sustainability Standards and Trade at UNIDO. Lucas Bettarel, consultant at Boston Consulting Group. He's joining us virtually. Hi, Lucas. Tom Walsh, CA at Renetech. Daphine Muzawazi, Senior Program Officer for Institutional Development at the African Union Development Agency-NEPAD. And finally, our friend from this morning, Hendrina Doroba, Manager for the Education and Skills Development Division at the African Development Bank Group, joining us virtually again. We wish you were here, Hendrina. And so let's dive in. We start with you, Camilla. How can regional cooperation programs support basic and technical education to lay the ground for effective industrial policies and local value addition?
Okay, now. Okay. Thank you so much. Another long question. In terms of the role of regional cooperation programs, I think they are really key. And we heard also in this morning panels, really the need to emphasize regional value chains, regional cooperation beyond just interventions at the national level. So they do play a critical role, but they come as a complementary element to what is happening at the national level. So I'm speaking here on behalf of the European Commission, and the EU, as most of you know, is one of the largest donors in education. And the idea is really now under the new EU Global Gateway Strategy. We've talked about it with some of you in the coffee breaks. It's really the new EU approach towards industrialization, economic transformation in key sectors of change, which are also aligned if we're talking of Africa with the African Union Strategy 2063. It's really around digital, climate and energy, transport, but also education and research. And within this Global Gateway Strategy, the ambition is to mobilize 150 billion euro of investments for Sub-Saharan Africa. And it's very critically acknowledged that education is not only a priority as part of the Global Gateway Strategy, but it's an integral element to all the sectors that we're looking at. So it's also an enabler. We call it the 360-degree approach, as really an enabler to make these investments take off. So in terms of the EU-Africa partnership, it's a critical element, education and skills. And actually this year, it's the 25th year anniversary of the EU-AU partnership. So there has been a couple of events earlier this year in Brussels. There was the Ministerial Summit. Later this year, November, there will be the EU-AU Summit, and it will be closely tied to business involvement. There will be the Business Forum. And in the Business Forum, skills, of course, will come in because, as I already mentioned, they're the integral kind of precondition for these investments and to take off. And then there's also the Global Gateway Forum happening later in October. So if we talk more pragmatically in terms of how regional cooperation programs can support education and skills to lay the groundwork, as you asked, for industrial policies. So one element is to lay the groundwork, but another element is from the industrial side that these industrial policies, as part of their core elements, need to integrate skills. So we cannot talk of industrial policies, and we've heard of it from also some of the MNSCs here in the room, without talking of the skills element. So what we're doing with the regional projects, one example is opportunity-driven skills in VET in Africa that was already mentioned in the previous panel. It's an EU-funded initiative, 75 million euro initiative, implemented in a Team Europe spirit by four European member states. And here the idea is really to start from the employment opportunities and have a private sector driven approach. So just to give you an example, what is funded under this project, we have also call for proposals. So there are different interventions happening at country level. And one is in Namibia, where green hydrogen is one of the key priority areas. However, at country level, they know there's a critical skills gap of around 140,000 people that need to be ready to work in these sectors. So there's a project project starting, which is led by the National University, the Namibia University of Science and Technology, jointly with key private actors in the renewable energy sector, to not only address the ad hoc demand, but something we've also talked about here today is a system strengthening to equip the TVET tutors, to ensure the curriculums are relevant, to really respond to the needs of the private sector. So really a two-tier approach, the ad hoc skills training, but also the overall system strengthening. A last thing that I would like to mention, apart from the regional programs that we're implementing, there's a lot also happening around mobility, which we've heard about this morning in the panel. There's a Youth Mobility for Africa Global Gateway flagship, which has a number of initiatives under it. And it's really about also ensuring mobility on the continent, but also beyond, between the continent and Europe. And at a higher level to facilitate this dialogue on skills between the European Union and the African Union. And we've started a lot of strategic discussions with NEPAD. Daphine is also on the panel to have also at the steering level a very close cooperation around this area. That's it in a nutshell.
Thank you so much. Virpi, Stucki, local value addition strategies often hang on one key ingredient, a skilled workforce. From your experience, why is workforce development so essential to turning resource extraction into lasting national benefit?
Thank you so much for the question. First of all, I wanted to tell that I'm very happy to be here hosted by Volvo. Volvo is one of the 3 founding members of the LKDF 2012, along with Festo, I see Nader here, and Scania. So very happy to be here. Thanks, Johan. Skills is one key ingredient, but I would add 2 other ones. But before telling what these 2 are, in my view, I wanted to give some figures on local value addition. So what percentage of the product stays at the beginning of the supply chain with the producer at the farm level? In a case of coffee, it's about 5%. In the case of bananas, it's between 4 to 20%. In the case of luxury ethical fashion, Katarina is there. Yes, it's between 1 to 2%, which is high level. So if you talk about fast fashion, I don't even know what that figure is, but I don't want to know. But when we talk about artisanal gold mining, between 70 to 98% stays with the producer, with the miner. So this is just some food for thought. And when we talk about value addition, skills is important, but the 2 other ingredients I wanted to mention is policies and transparency. So starting with policies, you mentioned about policy, importance of policy, but I also wanted to mention another version of policy, which is that you might know that recently many African countries have put a ban on exporting raw minerals. So basically attracting investment in the country level. And this is a very powerful policy decision, basically making sure that the value has to be, the more money has to be kept local. And UNIDO is already working in this kind of environment in Guinea. We heard from our panelist, Alteo, where we work with working on helping the skills development in the case of bauxite refining. When we talk about transparency, of course, this is a very key issue, because if you don't know where the value is added, we cannot really push or change the situation. And typically supply chains are not transparent. It's not that they could not be, because there are a lot of technical solutions. It's difficult. especially when we talk about minerals, when through the smelting and transportation, it's not very easy to track anymore. But in many cases, for example, for cocoa and coffee, there might be solutions, but not necessarily the will to see where the value is. Some actors benefit more than others. And now going into the skills topic, it's very important, but if it's combined with policy changes and the transparency, that's when we start talking about systems change. And UNIDO is, of course, we want systems change, and for this we are using the market systems development approach. But also recently we have been conducting a political economy analysis, which is also very important to understand who has the power in the supply chain. So basically, I want to bring into the discussion the holistic approach on local value addition and the role of skills. Finally, focusing on the skills topic, the question was about how to make this kind of national resource extraction have lasting impact, and of course it should be positive impact, and for this we need green skills. Typically when we talk about green skills, we talk about 3 different areas: either skills that are really focusing on sustainability, ESG, reporting, data collection, and this UNIDO is working with the LKDF partners. We just launched last year the sustainability curricula. We have a Renetech, and Festo was also involved in the co-creation. Then another type of green skill is when you improve the production process. So you use less water or reduce the CO2 intensity. And then, of course, the third item is when you actually produce, you manufacture items that are needed for green transition, so solar panels, for example. And for all of these 3 areas, UNIDO is working already with our partners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Virpi. Lucas Bettarel, how are you? All good?
All great, thank you. Hope you can hear me.
You can't be here because you're getting married.
Oh,
This is true. This is true. In 2 days already.
When is the wedding?
The wedding is on Friday in the south of France, so that's why I thank the whole team for making it possible for me to join this forum, even remotely, and also be able to finalize the last preparation for the wedding.
Oh, that's so great! Congratulations. We are so happy for you. Thank you for taking your time. So how do climate risks undermine local value chain?
Well, yeah, first I want to start with climate. I think we can all witness that the physical climate impacts are on the rise. Last year alone, which was the hottest year recorded to date, by the way, we saw really strong typhoons in Southeast Asia. We saw massive floods in Europe. We saw even the wildfires in LA and many more. And when they hit those climate hazards, they ripple across the entire value chain. And as we say, we are only as strong as our weakest link. So for example, there is currently a massive heat wave that impacts North India and Pakistan. And it's sharply reducing the rice and wheat output. So this disrupts, of course, the local farmers' income, but not only that, it also impacts the food exporters, the retailers, and the consumers abroad in the end. So every step of the value chain is at risk from those rising climate hazards. In the papers that we published together with the World Economic Forum earlier this year, we estimate that physical climate risk could cut between 5 and 25% of company EBITDA every year by 2050 if no adaptation is implemented. So really, countries and companies must address adaptation as a value chain strategy. Today, Adaptation remains underfunded and largely led by the public sector. So yeah, government are building national adaptation plans. Companies are starting to develop climate risk management plans, but very few are looking at this challenge, this climate vulnerability with a value chain perspective. And why? Well, because that requires collaboration to align on a common vision, on the joint planning and shared investments, as well as overcoming barriers such as identifying bankable projects, accessing data on local climate risks, or building local capacity to integrate this new adaptation technology on the ground. So let's look at this last point on how to build local capacity and bridge the skills gap for climate adaptation. On the one hand, we have to train, of course, the local workers to build, to deploy, to operate, to maintain those new climate technologies like solar irrigation systems or resilient infrastructure. And to help bridge the gap, we can identify levers like mandating local workforce participation in adaptation projects or creating targeted training pipelines and support local innovation system with a bunch of incentive mechanisms. But it's not only a workforce training issue. We also have to look at the decision makers and help them get aware and understand what are the climate risks that they are facing and what are the solutions that they could implement into their policies or into their investment planning. For example, BCG, we partnered last year with a Central Asian country in a given region where dairy and meat is really important for the economy. And what we found is that the livestock in this region has been wiped out multiple times in the last decades because of really important floods happening in the region. And yet the public investment there kept flowing in the same vulnerable zone without accounting for the climate risk and adapted protection measures. So really what was needed there was first to start at the decision maker level and make them understand the risks and the possible solution that they could implement in order to build resilience in this region. So basically that's why for driving lasting value chain resilience, we need both a trained workforce and also climate aware decision makers.
Merci beaucoup. Tom Walsh, how can workforce strategies remain inclusive and responsive to future needs?
This is an important question, and I think I'm going to talk about it from the renewable energy perspective and also the circular economy. Earlier today, there was a question that was put up about value addition, and I think entrepreneurship came up as one of the key words, and I think that's a very important word in this context. And I would say that renewable energy is multifaceted in terms of its implementation. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, if you think of Kenya or Tanzania or Uganda, today they're up around 80% renewable from the point of view of electricity. And what does that do for you? Well, obviously, in an interdependent world, it increases the resilience of those economies, and resilience is a very important word. So too does the circular economy. For example, if you take geothermal in the Kenyan context, they drilled their first geothermal well in 1957. That's a very long time ago. And they have drilled many wells since then. Currently today, they're the 8th biggest producer of geothermal in the world. They have between 1,100 and 1,500 geothermal engineers. So they have a core competence base around geothermal, which they now export to sister countries like Tanzania and Ethiopia, very involved in the Ethiopian context. So skills development and deep capacity development can take a bit of time. I spent some time with the technical director there in Kengen, and he told me that on an annual basis, they send about 15 to 20 people on masters and PhDs around the world, which they do fully funded in different centres, Iceland, Germany, Japan, key locations which have high geothermal capacity. Just to speak a little bit about some other examples from that we have been involved with, we've been quite involved in a floating solar project in Uganda, which is sponsored by NEAR under the Sustainability Impact Accelerator. And there it was working with UEGCL, which is the local utility, and it was to build the capacity specifically around floating solar, both from a design perspective, from an operation perspective, so that the project development phase of the project, which in this case was on the Nile in Asimba, it's still a project in, if you like, in the project preparation phase. I mean, in project development from a renewable energy perspective, you can often spend many years actually preparing a project. When you actually build the project, it might only take 12 months to 2 years, but you could spend 5 years actually doing your feasibility studies, doing your detailed design, getting all of your permits, and then of course you have to get financing, which is getting financing in your own right is a skill set as well that is required. So in renewable energy, there are many skills that many disciplines that you actually have to develop over time, and these are all market needs. But what I want to say is that some of the market needs are already met, and there's deep experience for the green transition, and some are in evolution and change and are still required. So in this Uganda project, the plan is that it will be a 10 megawatt expanded to a 60 megawatt project. The first project was done in Ghana, which is a 1 megawatt project. So it obviously, from the resilience of the country, is highly hydro based. If they have an alternative, you always need an alternative. It increases the resilience of the network in that particular country. So just to mention some of the skills that are needed, obviously you need the design and the development and the procurement. You need the people that can actually construct and build the actual facility. You have to consider the operation and maintenance issues, because these plants go for a very, very long time, and you need to take care of various different issues, not least of you have the water hyacinth on the Nile, and that needs to be taken care of so that it doesn't interfere with the hydro plant or the floating solar plant. So there are lots of implementation issues that need to be considered in these particular projects. That's more on the electric side. Obviously, you also need to consider that it's not just electric, it's transport, and it's also biomass. I mean, primary energy use in Uganda, Tanzania is still 60, 70, 80%, which is based around biomass, which is essentially for cooking. So that's obviously still an area that is in transition or change, and there's a lot of people working on that. To speak a little bit about the circular economy, because the circular economy is an area that is sort of being developed globally on a continuous basis, and very much it starts with waste management. How do you manage waste? How do you recycle waste? How do you introduce plastic chains in terms of recyclables so that they're reused? But it's much broader than that. It's also use of organics. There's a lot of organic waste across sub-Saharan Africa. In Cote d'Ivoire, it's 30 million tons per year. It's 5 million tons of cocoa pod husk. In Uganda, it's about 12 million tons. So you have 2 harvests to 3 harvests. You have a very large volume of residues, which goes to feed. It does go to feed. It goes to some uses, but there is still significant waste. And there's also the waste before it gets to the table. The avocados, the mangoes all come at the same time, and they never get to market. So the circular economy, probably in a sub-Saharan context, has an opportunity to generate millions of jobs in the next 5 to 10 years. In many cases, there's still a lot of innovation investment that needs to happen in terms of innovation pathways to develop these new types of products, whether they're biochemicals, biofertilizers, bioplastics. So there's a huge amount that can be done in the bioeconomy. And the answers to these questions won't come from the global north, because the global south has other types of crops that are not grown in the global north. So you need in-house innovation that happens in country. And that's a key step to building the entrepreneurship, which is very important. Just to give you an example, I'll give an example of a fly called the black soldier fly. This is a fly that grows extremely well in, above 20 degrees. These businesses have developed rapidly across East Africa, in Uganda, in Tanzania, in Kenya. And the fly feeds on mangoes, market waste. It feeds on all sorts of organics. And what that does is it creates a protein. This protein is a protein that can go into fish feed and can also go into chicken feed, which substitutes soya, which is an imported product. So that's, ways of creating this value addition. And these entrepreneurs are typically entrepreneurs that are, I would say, under 35, highly educated. Some of them did their masters in Europe, or they did their masters in the US. They could be dual nationals that have built these enterprises in a relatively short period of time. And then the other thing that they have is other value-add products like waste, which is used in biofertilizer production. So I would say the circular economy has fantastic potential for creating additional value and additional jobs. Probably what needs to happen is it needs more entrepreneurship, and it also needs more entrepreneurship, and it also needs innovation pathway development. And then finally, to say that obviously on-the-job training can't be substituted. If you gain the skills and you gain the knowledge, you need to use the knowledge, otherwise you lose the knowledge. So it's very important that that connection to the to the working environment is relatively soon, and that people are gainfully employed. Maybe they won't be full 100% gainfully employed, but maybe 30 to 40%, but at least their skills are being built on an ongoing basis. So there are some of the needs. There are many more, and I'll give some more examples of entrepreneurship a little later.
Thank you so much. Daphine and Muzawazi, how can governments design incentives and regulations that align national development goals with the private sector interests and international sustainability standards?
Thank you so much, facilitator, and good afternoon to everyone. So in terms of, I think this is a big challenge currently, and it's been ongoing for quite a long time. How do we align the national priorities, but also looking at serving the interests of the private sector, but also looking at as well serving the initiatives around social inclusion. I'll just touch quickly on how the NEPAD's work, which really works to focus on systemic transformation. But that is only, of course, possible if our institutions and our policies and then our various stakeholders are aligned. So these elements cannot be seen in isolation, and also looking at how partners can then, of course, work together to serve not only economic development, but also inclusion and sustainability. And at Agency-NEPAD, of course, we support countries to translate policy into practical practical implementation. Our work and our mandate also helps to strengthen national systems as well, so that they provide a conducive environment for private sector to also invest and thrive. And then looking at how do we also coordinate cross-sectoral efforts of course, the African Union as a governing body for implementation of African Union member state projects, but also how do we bring it down now to development through various initiatives. I'll touch quickly on also how do we also maintain this balance in terms of the shared vision of continental, national, and also international standards as well. As the African Union, of course, we're guided by Agenda 2063, which is our blueprint that supports Africa's development through inclusive growth, but also now aligning it as well to all regional and national development levels as well, but also aligning it, of course, to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and see how our programs are aligned as well to the SDGs. Through the Agenda 2063, and of course with the African Union at continental level, there's been quite a lot of strides in terms of the AU development frameworks that align with continental development agendas. I can talk about one, the Program for Infrastructure Development in Africa, the PIDA program, which is a framework that really cuts across how countries can then integrate sustainability in infrastructure development. I can also talk about the Comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program, which is another framework of the African Union continentally that is looking at also how do countries invest directly into agricultural sector and increase their budgetary contributions towards continental agricultural development. So that trickles down, of course, to national level, and then how countries can then embed agricultural development into their national development plans. And again, touching into some of the goals of the UN SDGs. So through that, I will talk as well of one major example of a project, or two projects actually. I think my director spoke about it earlier on in the morning around strengthening national institutions that are working with vulnerable communities. So this is one project that's really supporting now how do we co-design policy frameworks, how do we now have incentivize or incentives for private sector to also come in and invest, and looking at the value add of investing in corporate social responsibility, but also looking at the advantage for the private sector in investing in social development as well. So through SNVC, we're really working at 4 levels. That's looking at social protection within the continental frame, under policy reforms, how do we influence policy development and reforms towards targeting vulnerable groups. At national level, we're working with government institutions, ministries, civil society organizations to see how they can then align and provide the necessary systems that allow also for vulnerable groups to be included in social protection systems. So again, that aligns with the continental approach through Agenda 2063. At regional level, of course, we work with the SNVC supporting the regional economic communities, the RECs, and by allowing them to provide sort of a platform of how the member countries of the regions come together and also talk and speak and dialogue around issues that are surrounding the inclusiveness of vulnerable groups in designing policy frameworks and incentivizing, of course, the private sector. Lastly, as well, we have a pillar under SNVC that focuses on technical advisory services that are also provided to government institutions, particularly because they are the ones that are driving really the social agenda in terms of policy alignment. So how do we then capacitate them, of course, digitally, technology-wise, to make sure that they align and can implement social protection programs across their countries. Of course, I spoke about partnerships earlier on. All these efforts, of course, are backed by strong collaboration with international partners, for example, but also having our local development banks that are also part and parcel of this journey, But I think the strong collaboration with our partners, I think my colleague Camilla spoke already of the African Union, European Union collaboration and commitments that have been made, looking at partners like Enabel, GIZ, who are also part of this journey, the International Labour Organization, of course, UNIDO, CEDA, which also kind of come in and backstop ensuring that these frameworks that are adopted align with, of course, the international sustainability standards. Secondly, as well, I'll just speak also briefly on the second program that is creating opportunities for youth and women in Africa, the COYOA program. This is a huge program that we're working on with support from the Spanish government to a tune of 20 million euro over a span of 5 years. Again, the main idea is how do we align, of course, economic growth through support for women and youth entrepreneurs, but at the same time, how are we also making sure that the vulnerable groups of women, youth, young girls, entrepreneurs are also catered for as we then develop further. So this program supported by Spain is really assisting on how do we then provide skilling, technical expertise, capacity building, to women entrepreneurs, to youth entrepreneurs, for example, so that they can also sort of leapfrog towards economic empowerment. And that we providing, of course, digital training, financial literacy training, we're providing skills development. And on the social aspect, we have a second component under that program that is providing support to civil society and NGOs that are dealing with some of the soft issues that women and youth go through, including sexual, domestic violence, gender inequality. How can they also be included and embedded into society so they can influence as well policy and decision making? The last pillar focuses really on incubation. I think there was a speaker earlier on who spoke about the importance of mentorship and mentoring as part of skills development and skills transfer. And that is what we're doing under this COYOA program, and talking about how do we now embed the incubation process of entrepreneurs, and also how can they learn from existing business owners that are successful in the market, and how can then those skills be also transferred. So in a nutshell, I think it's two major programs we're working on, but the idea really is to then how do we get our governments, how do we get the regional economic communities be part and parcel of policy development, but also how do we get the beneficiaries themselves on the social aspect, how do they also get involved and included in policy development for them, and also how do they also influence and providing the conducive environment for private sector to thrive. I'll stop here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Daphine. Hendrina, how can regional development banks support countries to align education and training with inclusive industry policies?
Thank you. Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Thank you. So allow me to give an example of my own institution in terms of how we are supporting countries to align education with education and training with industries. First of all, as an institution, you have to make sure that your strategic priorities are also aligned to the strategic priorities for the continent, but more specific, in this case, strategic priorities for the country. Now, as Africa Development Bank, we do have, and I said this in the morning, that we do have a 10-year strategy. And the beauty about this 10-year strategy is that it has put the investment in the youth as a key and a central vision of this strategy. And then also the aspect, it has also given priority to technical vocation education, as well as promoting or supporting regional member countries in science, technology, and innovation. So you see that, first of all, you really have to have that strategic orientation as a regional body that is supporting regional member countries. And for us, even just to break that down, we do have a framework under which we are actually translating the 10-year strategy into action. Currently, we have what we call the Youth Jobs for Youth in Africa strategy, which is coming to an end this year, and the Skills for Employability and Productivity in Africa action plan, again, which is coming to an end this year. But critical in those two documents or frameworks is also the importance and the need to support skills development for the regional member countries. Later this year, we are actually developing the action plan for Jobs, Youth and Skills Jobs, Youth and Skills Action Plan, which is actually going to support the implementation of the 10-year strategy henceforth. Now, when it comes to that is at institutional level in terms of alignment and making sure that happens. But when it comes to national level, Africa Development Bank also, as you know, our primary clients for our investment or support are countries. And so our entry point of engagement with government is always at a point when we are having a dialogue to establish the strategic framework under which we are supposed to support that particular country, which is known as the country strategy paper. This is usually a 3 or 5 year strategy. Now, one of the things that you need to ensure also during those consultations or development of those strategic papers is also to make sure that human capital is given the priority in alignment with the priorities that the government, that particular national government has set in place. There are cases where we ensure the one of the key pillars is on human capital development. If it's not a pillar on its own in that strategy, then we also have to make sure that we strategically look at what the priority pillars are and see how we can integrate human capital development in that space. But within the broader framework, of course, then we have to ensure how we use the technical vocational education and training, as well as supporting science, technology, and innovation fits into that framework to support. So alignment to national strategies is critical. Alignment to all institutional strategies or priorities is also critical. Now, just to give a couple of examples on, what does this mean in practice, and how has the Africa Development Bank been supporting countries to make sure that they align their education to industry needs. We have a good example of the work that we are doing in Ghana, for instance, where the bank has supported the establishment and the operationalization of the sector skill bodies, which are industry-led, platforms that are designed to develop demand-driven training content. And again, this is also aligned to the labor market needs in key economic sectors. Again, these key economic sectors are sectors that are identified by that particular country. In the case of Ghana, I think some of the economic sectors that they are looking at is in construction, in agriculture, energy, and ICT. One thing that we like about these bodies also is that they help to bridge the gap between training institutions, the employers, but also the private sector, including supporting or informing the curricular development and certification that is required in such a space. The other example I would want to give is also the work that we did within the support that we gave to Rwanda. In this case, we used the policy-based instrument to support Rwanda, where employment and entrepreneurship policy were given a priority. As a bank, we supported and were very catalytic in supporting the government to make sure that the reforms on TVET sectors, which led to a dramatic change in as far as technical and vocational education enrollments are concerned. And we are talking about increasing enrollment from 3% when we started the project in 2005 to about 30-40% in 2024. Again, that simply shows that yes, you look at the alignment, but also you have to provide policy support to make sure that the policies create an enabling environment for skills development, but also alignment with the private sector needs. Now, the other thing I also want to bring for this to this discussion is also the importance that we attach to delivering education and training in regional member countries. One thing we acknowledge and appreciate is that the demand is huge, and this cannot be done by the Africa development alone. And therefore, we need to work with other partners to make sure that this happens and contributes to the transformation that we are talking about. Very, very specific for the bank in terms of the areas where we support. I can highlight 4. One, of course, is the skills development, which I've talked about, making sure that we support the training, we support the technical uplifting and equipping the technical vocational institutions that are training the youth for that. But we also support business development services. And I've heard some of my speakers have spoken, the speakers on the panel have spoken to that. We are supporting both in institutions of learning and also in some of the entrepreneurship setup, we are supporting incubation because we do believe the youth have ideas that need to be incubated and supported and also accelerated to make sure that they are able to, contribute to the transformation that we are talking about. That business development service is also accompanied with the, supporting them with market linkages for those that are ready to go to the market, for those that need to go into further development. It's through this mentorship and just making sure that they are coached to a level that their product is industry ready to solve or to resolve some of the issues in the industry. Then the policy and institutional reform, which I've already talked about, that is critical. So we don't just look at one component of the support, but we look at it from a holistic perspective. And so making sure that we have the relevant policy and institution to be able to support. And yes, of course, this support is accompanied by funding. So leveraging not only our own resources, but also looking at who else is supporting and just making sure that we move in this together. Private sector, again, in this space also play a critical role, not just for funding, but also using the space for internship, their own space for internship. We are also exploring possibilities where some of these private sectors who are using equipment that is supposed to be used by some of the graduates to actually be part of the skilling of the youth, either in terms of creating internship, but or maybe taking time off to come and engage with them. So there's quite a lot, and of course, sustainability is also another important component that we ensure and support to make sure that what we are doing is not just a one-off thing, but it's a systemic change within the government system. I know my time is up, but I want to end there for now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Hendrina. We have only 6 minutes left, so if you kindly try to be brief and as specific as possible at the end now and give examples and so on. So Camilla, how can outcome-based monitoring and evaluation frameworks be integrated into regional skills programs to ensure they deliver measurable impact on industrial competitiveness?
Great question. If we have to share the 6 minutes, I want to be fair, so I'm just going to use 1 or 2 minutes for that one. So basically, I think it's a key point that we've been discussing. One thing is these kind of forums where we are coming together as of today, but then it's really about how do we move to action, to outcomes. So I think this forum can play a critical role, and I've already seen we are establishing connections. We have the private sector in the room. We are trying to see how we can really build the business case of skills development along the value chain. But when it comes to really outcome monitoring, we really need to look and as part of the commission, of course, all our projects are regularly evaluated, but outcomes come in at a later level. So this is more about the tracer surveys, trying to understand, especially when we talk of jobs in the more informal sector, which is the majority of the jobs, we may think that placements rates are high. We've been hearing some placement rates of 80 to 90% after training, but how does it look like after 6 months, after 1 year? So I think when we look at the outcome, one is the immediate employability after training, but we need to also get stronger at understanding the long-term impact, basically, of what we're doing. And I think one part is this knowledge exchange. Another part is tapping into these best practices, which we're also trying to do now more with the kind of strategic cooperation between, let's say, the European Union as a donor and the African Union, because there are a lot of good practices that we can draw from, and oftentimes we don't know about them. So I think the starting point is first to share the knowledge, and then to be more critical in terms of what we fund. There are a lot of impact-based funds right now that are looking at outcome funding. I mean, I'm just giving the example of the Education Outcomes Fund, which looks at basic education, but we need to see really how can we structure funding more and be more demanding in terms of what we want to achieve beyond just training, especially with this new opportunity-driven approach that we've introduced also from the European Union to really try and start from, we want to reach at the employment, so have we really managed to tackle that? So I'm going to share the remaining minutes with my
in solidarity. Thank you so much for being generous against with your colleagues here. Virpi, Stucki, in your experience, how do partnerships mechanisms like the PPDPs enhance skills development outcomes? And what are the key factors that make these partnerships effective?
Thank you so much. Just to build on what Camilla said, the LKDF just recently did the impact kind of compilation. So I think the results are very interesting. If you Google LKDF impact, I'm sure you can find it. I think more than 12 years of data pulled in one infographics. Going back to the question, PPDPs, I was thinking what would be something that has not been already mentioned, because I heard many things in the previous session. Many of you have been here. I think this is my 13th LKDF event. So I was thinking what could be something different. And since we are at the private sector, I know private sector and Volvo likes to talk about continuous improvement. So I was thinking, what is the continuous improvement that all the partners, PDP, can get out of the skills model? And the PPDP was actually invented by SIDA. So we have SIDA here, who brought it to UNIDO. You also brought later on the MSD approach, so PPDP, MSD, and UNIDO used to do skills development, but we started the PPDP approach because of SIDA. So we kind of learned a new model, but we started to do the political economy analysis. So perhaps SIDA could learn from that, from UNIDO. Then I was thinking about private sector. What does private sector learn? I mean, private sector has been doing skills development. And of course, the importance of curricular accreditation, which was already mentioned in the previous session, to have the sustainability built into the skills programs. But perhaps it could be that the context matters. So every country has a different TVET system, and the kind of curricular development and accreditation really changes per country. So perhaps that's something that private sector could have learned and improve the skills provision. And then if I think of our member states, so the public sector TVET system, I was just last month inaugurating a center in Sierra Leone on automotive sector, and this center was the benchmark for the country, because it had all the center looked like you could be in Germany or in Japan. It was really top-notch center, and the teachers had been trained in Japan, South Africa, Ghana, Kenya, and somewhere in Europe, perhaps it was Germany. Really cutting edge, and this was the PPDP model, and it would not have been possible without that. So continuous improvement is the key aspect of PPDPs.
Thank you so much, Virpi. Lucas, what kinds of multi-stakeholders collaboration are most effective in closing climate and skills gaps across industrial value circle? Their chains, value chains, sorry. Yeah. Did you hear the question? I'm sorry.
Yes, I heard it well, and I'll try to be as brief as possible because that's an important question. And to start with, I'd like to reinforce Andrina's message from earlier, where what we know for sure is you can't build climate resilience alone. What you can do, though, is to set up collaboration platforms to build it together with your value chain. And these platforms, they are essential to make this work with companies, with government, with development banks, with civil society. They need to collaborate to share data. They need to collaborate to share technologies, and they need to collaborate to share their capabilities so that they can develop and deploy those adaptation solutions across the entire value chain. So now, to make it effective, this is very important to understand that this collaboration on adaptation is not only about closing the climate risk gap. It's also about creating economic and social value for the local ecosystem. And basically, we can see adaptation investments like productive public spending. They create immediate demand for materials, for skilled labor, for services. Just like, for example, after the 2008 financial crisis in the US, where the government created a stimulus funding that prioritized infrastructure to restart growth. I guess that we can do the same today with adaptation. And it's a win-win situation because in our research, we found that the benefit to cost ratio of adaptation projects in PPP or not ranges from 2-to-1 all the way up to 35-to-1. And the situation is because shared investment, they reduce duplication, they allow to pool resources, and they align stakeholders' incentives. The key here really is to make all the stakeholders on the local value chain to take ownership and work in collaboration to build collective resilience. But my last point is beyond creating value, deploying adaptation technologies is also an opportunity to create new jobs. As demand will grow for new technical skills like building and operating geothermal facilities, like Tom mentioned earlier, or installing solar panels or building flood defenses. Here again, we need collaboration from employers, from development banks, from government, from schools, and they need to collaborate to create the vocational training tracks that are linked to the new market needs. All in all, I'd say that climate adaptation and skill development are inherently collaborative efforts, and building shared platforms is a powerful way to drive resilience across the entire value chain.
Thank you so much, and good luck at the wedding and the love celebration. May the groom or the bride say yes.
Let's hope so.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you, Lucas. Finally, we have three more. We have Tom Walsh, we have Daphine, and Henrina. So, Tom, in what ways can investment in green and digital technologies catalyze sustainable industrialization and help countries leapfrog into higher value-added segments of global value chains?
Sure, I'll say a few words and then I'll pass it on. I worked for Ericsson actually for about 12 or 13 years in the 90s, and one of my roles was doing capacity development programs for the mobile systems. So we had about 300 technical instructors, and we were conducting training in 60 different countries on a weekly basis. And that was the start of the digital transition. And that followed on and facilitated innovations like M-Pesa in Kenya, which is mobile money. That last year had a turnover of $400 billion. $400 billion. It has an impact on, I would say, probably every individual in the country, whether it's a small business or it's the lady or the gentleman that's selling the tomatoes or the avocados on the side of the street. So digitalization has been there for some time. It is getting more and more sophisticated. We are seeing the emergence of, for example, MRV systems, monitoring, reporting, verification systems, which are real time, which is very important for the unlocking of, for example, carbon finance. So that one of the things that is very important for investors on a carbon finance perspective is that they can verify and they can monitor and report. So it is getting more sophisticated. In terms of the green investment, the green investment, I should say, is, I mean, we're involved in the Blue Economy program across Tanzania and Kenya. And one of the, I was in Mombasa just 3 weeks ago, or 4 weeks ago, actually. And it was very interesting sitting down with the banks, and the banks, local banks I'm talking about now, not multilateral banks, local banks. The local bank said to the audience, it's much easier for us to take a financing risk if we know the full chain. If they have visibility on the full chain, who's selling to who, and if they can feel secure that I have a business, but I'm selling to this party and that party is selling on to the next party, if they can see the whole chain, then they are much more comfortable in taking that investment risk, whether it's in waste management that relates to the blue economy, or whether it's some other value chain in terms of shrimp farming or some residue that is being developed. Like there was one lady that mentioned to me that she wants to convert coconut nuts into biochar for biofertilizer, and she needed $20,000. She sent me a few message a couple of days later saying, well, I got the $20,000 for my business plan, and that was locally, and it was a nice investment to develop a new business. So coming back to my point on terms of the entrepreneurship, the digital technology, and there are many different value chains, the entrepreneurship will definitely pull the demand for the skills. There's no doubt about that.
Thank you so much. Daphine, how can national skills strategies support economic diversification?
Thank you so much for that. I'll also try to quickly touch on some initiatives we're also working on as well. But I think as per today, the bulk of the intervention since this morning really is talking about the whole mismatch of skilling and how do we then pull the supply side and the demand side, and how do we match those two ends. I think Tom just spoke about it now, and ensuring how entrepreneurship now serves as a tool for determining the demand side of skills development. But I'll quickly talk about one major issue as well that want to highlight briefly on, especially on data-driven skills development as well, and how that also impacts in terms of our interventions and etc. And looking at the issue of skills anticipation, skills forecasting, and how we use those as well as for tools to really find a match and the balance between what the qualifications are supplying, but also matching with the demand side. As AUDA, again, we are working with 2 or 3 major frameworks and platforms. One, of course, is the Africa Critical Skills Bank. The second is the Africa Continental Qualifications Framework. So these are really primary data-driven sources or platform that really analyze the database of online jobs, and continuously gather information and provide rich, up-to-date source of information on employer skills and what the job market sort of requires. It also kind of maps current skills needs per sector, and I think that's very important as well, so that both as at national and regional level, we use that capacity of data collection, data analysis, and how we use that to also fit into the labor market data and identify future skills needs. Secondly, of course, we do have the Africa Occupational Standards Development Framework, very important framework that we are working on currently and designing. And this is a continental framework as well that serves now to improve on the quality and relevance of skills development across Africa, but also, of course, aligning it to our overall continental Agenda 2063. But the aim of AOSF really is to address, again, the skills gap, enhance collaboration between public and private sector, but also facilitate development of competent practitioners. So again, we now working to harmonize all these frameworks and develop an approach to a harmonized approach to occupational standards across the African continent, but also develop and recognize that skills and bridging the skills gap really and labor market requirements is quite an important factor when regards to skills development. Again, this work really cuts across, of course, the different skills and how do we strengthen the quality, but as well looking at also skills mapping, targeted skills that the labor market requires currently, and how we now prepare, of course, the educational qualification sector to now start speaking as well to what the demand side of employability and entrepreneurship also requires. So that's part of the work that the AOSF will look at, and how do we bridge now this communication between education and the labor market. Lastly, as well, I think one of the major challenges, of course, with this is that, of course, as governments, most of their interventions when it comes to skills development is targeted for skills in the informal economy, as compared to now on the economic development side, we're looking at skills that then, of course, attract private sector development. So that bridging that gap as well is part of the work we want to do with the AOSF to see how we bring in, of course, the needs of the private sector, but also now looking at the government's responsibility in ensuring that their citizens are also equally accessing the necessary qualifications and skills as well.
Thank you. And finally, Hendrina, the last question is to you. What are the priority investments and reforms needed to scale up a demand-driven training system across Africa?
Good question. And thank you very much. I think I'm going to put that into 4 points. Number one is, if we are talking about demand-driven skills, we must make sure that institutions have the right infrastructure to meet that demand. So for me, the first thing we need to do is to prioritize the investment into the infrastructure for skills development. And we're talking about physical infrastructure, human capital, as well as digital infrastructure. The second one is, this morning and up until this afternoon, we have heard quite a bit in terms of collaboration, what we need to do differently, and how we can work together. And there are a number of examples where this is working well. So I think the question for me would be, how do we bring all this together and provide or contribute to a systemic change within the African countries? Because a lot of good examples here, a lot of things that have worked, but we need to look at it from a systemic level and see how we can support that. Third, of course, is the issue of that would require resource mobilization. And resource mobilization is a collective effort, like I said earlier. So how do we then work together to make that happen? Because we cannot do without resources. And there are different ways that we can provide or contribute to that. So I think we need to think through that and see how this can be done. And then lastly, I think a lot of what I've heard here is about purposeful investment in sector-specific skills. We are doing so well and we could do better. And imagine us looking at specific institutions that are focusing on specializing on specific sector skills. We can do that together, and I think it could be a right way to go. So with that, I want to say thank you. There's a possibility. And we, as Africa Development Bank, we are looking forward to collaborating even more with all of you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hendrina. And thank you all the speakers for your input, very, very inspirational. And we have a very, very brief Q&A if there is an urgent question. Kali is ready for the microphone. Here we are, Katarina.
Thank you very much. Yeah, Katarina Eriksson, Tetra Pak. I was very happy to hear both Hendrina and Daphine mention agriculture. And agriculture is quite an underinvested area when we talk donor and development work. The reason we have to do the projects that we do, skills development with smallholder farmers, is that these farmers lack the access to farm advisors and services that potentially government could do. So my question, when it comes to Africa and NEPAD and African Development Bank, when you talk about agriculture development, does that include also helping countries to develop these services that farmers need to develop extension services, basically? Is that part of your work, or could it be?
Yes, would you like to answer?
Yes, thank you so much for that question. So I think earlier when I spoke, I started with the frameworks, and we have that comprehensive African agricultural development program that was developed by the African Union to ensure that countries, of course, invest. We move from 6% to 10% investments in agricultural development. But that encompasses quite a number of interventions, I think, depending on what the situation is within the countries themselves. But we're moving really now towards the issue of agricultural mechanization, agricultural processing, agricultural value chains. Because at the end of the day, with our interventions that we are working on, this program I spoke about on creating opportunities for youth and women in Africa, we're looking at some of the soft issues that, of course, the beneficiaries in the agricultural sector are going through. One, of course, we're all moving towards digitalization and access to information, access to technology when operationalizing agricultural activities. So there's one intervention on that one where already established agricultural entrepreneurs then can get upscaled through skilling and training to allow access to information on labor markets, allow access to branding, marketing of their products, etc. There's a second issue, of course, on agricultural trade, where, of course, we have the movement of goods and services in the agricultural sector through the African Continental Free Trade Area, the AFCFTA, which is another African Union initiative that's also targeting to allow and unlock movement of goods and services across the continent as well. That's on the trade issue. Of course, on smallholder farming, most of the targeted interventions really are supporting, again, value adding to agricultural production, looking at now how do we move from smallholder, peasant, pedestrian farming into now not more or less commercial, but how do we then move them to also have some sort of a targeted approach in terms of how they can also fit into the markets? Because, of course, there's a challenge usually with smallholder farmers and commercial farmers who already dominate the agricultural sector. So now more of our interventions are now how do we provide the smallholder farmers with the services that they can afford, of course, because there's affordability. There's financial services as well to support some of their businesses as well. But how do we provide now those certain tools that they can access loans, they can access soft loans, grants, and etc. to upscale some of their businesses? How do they use, of course, the proceeds from their farming activities, not only for household use, which is 80% of what smallholder farmer income goes to? How do they now shift from that to more investment-related financial services as well? So this is what we're doing with the Koiwa program, looking at the women in the agro sector. How do they move now from grants to investments? How do they move now from savings to also investing in the financial institutions as well? So that's part of the interventions, yeah.
There's so much more we can say and discuss, and we are so great because we have a dinner, you have a reception after this, and all the possibilities to elaborate even more on this. So thank you so much for sharing all your wisdom with us.